If you're running inbound marketing for motivated sellers, I would strongly suggest that you have more than one exit strategy. And the reason is because when leads come to you through Facebook ads or any other inbound marketing channel, you can't control exactly what types of leads are coming in. And if you only have one exit strategy, such as wholesale, you're going to end up throwing away a lot of opportunities. In this video, I'm going to explain why inbound leads actually convert better for Novations and why adding this exit strategy can dramatically improve your conversion rate. So before we dive in, I just want to kind of talk about some of the big differences between inbound marketing and outbound marketing. When you're doing outbound marketing, such as cold calling or text blasting, right, you're often pulling a huge list of data to reach out to before you start your marketing, right? And when you're pulling this list, you can filter it, to death, based on, property type, homeowner type, equity, motivation. You can filter it a number of different ways, right? But what this allows you to do is control a lot of the leads that are coming in or the types of leads that are coming in. Right? If you're only pulling a high equity list to cold call, most of the leads that you generate should be high equity, right? Or, unless the data that you pulled is just bad data, majority of your leads should actually be high equity. And that's for any filters that you use for the list that you're pulling to mark to with outbound marketing methods, right? So hypothetically, any leads that come in should quote unquote fit your buy box. But when you're running inbound marketing, these sellers are coming to you, right? You're not pulling these huge lists that you filtered to make sure that, the leads that are coming in fit your buy box, right? You're just putting your ads out there and sellers are raising their hand saying, hey, I'm interested in what you're talking about, right? And as a result, you're going to get all kinds of leads. You'll get high equity leads. You'll get low equity leads. You'll get, multifamily homes. You'll get single family homes. You'll get newer homes. You'll get older homes, right? You're just going to get a variety of different leads. And because of this, it's important that you have multiple exit strategies when you're running inbound marketing because, if you can't convert low equity leads and, 25 to 50% of your leads that are coming in are low equity, then you're going to have to throw away all of those opportunities. Whereas, if you had an exit strategy that allowed you to take advantage and convert low equity leads, then you'd be in a much better spot. So there are some tools that we can use when we're running inbound marketing, specifically Facebook ads. When we're driving traffic to instant forms, we can use conditional logic in those instant forms. So we can tell Facebook to filter out certain types of properties, like properties that are listed or properties that are low equity. We can do some things to filter out the types of leads that we don't want, but filtering out those leads is going to increase your cost per lead some. And, if you're only relying on one exit strategy and you're filtering out every property that's not, the ideal type of property for your regular wholesale transaction, then, I wouldn't say you're wasting marketing dollars, but you aren't capitalizing or taking full advantage of your marketing dollars. And this is the primary issue, if you are only wholesaling. But again, when you're running inbound marketing and leads come in that don't fit your buy box, you won't be able to convert them if you're only wholesaling, right? Just because, these leads will require different types of exit strategies based on the circumstances, whether it's a low equity home, a newer home, a home that's in really good condition, right? Sellers that are willing to sell their house for a small discount, but maybe not deep enough for you to wholesale it. Those types of leads will be hard to convert if you only have that one wholesale exit strategy. And ultimately what this ends up doing is kind of tying your hands, right? Because, you may have generated 50 leads and, you're only able to convert one of those 50 leads with the wholesale strategy. There may have been 2 or 3 other deals within that 50 leads that you could have converted if you had Novations or if you had creative finance subject to something like that, right? But it just limits you when you only have one exit strategy. The reason why Novations work perfectly with inbound leads is because, again, it gives you a lot of flexibility in the type of offer you're making to this seller, right? Typically, Novations work best with homes that are, in decent shape, where the seller's not asking, where the seller is going through something where they're willing to sell for a small discount, but maybe not a super deep discount. Novations allow you to pay sellers more. The sellers don't have to have quite as much equity in the home. Again, you can work with homes that are newer or in decent condition, right? And it ultimately opens the door to deals that wholesaling just simply can't touch. Another thing to throw in there is location, right? Typically you're only going to be able to wholesale deals where there's a lot of investor activity. With novations, that kind of widens the field for you, right? You're able to convert leads that are in small towns or rural areas where, there may be some buyer activity, but not necessarily investor activity. You just throw the house on the market. And as long as people are retail buyers are buying homes in that market, you still have a chance to get that deal sold. Whereas, if there were retail buyers in the market, but no investor activity, you'd have a hard time, finding an investor to sell that house to. So I want to break down a specific example, and I'll actually go through the first novation that I ever did. So the first novation that I did, it was a little bit outside of Atlanta, Georgia. It was like Atlanta, Georgia suburb, and the seller was asking for 300,000, or the house was worth $300,000. The seller was asking for like 250, right? And in order for us to wholesale that deal, we definitely would have had to get that house under contract, under 200,000, probably closer to like 150. The house was in pretty good shape. The seller wasn't super motivated, but the situation was that the seller, worked in the city of Atlanta, but lived in a suburb of Atlanta. So the house, the commute into work every day was just, it was crazy with, traffic and, the distance. So the seller ultimately, ended up staying at a friend's house most nights, just because their friend's house was much closer to his job. So he wasn't really using the house, right? He was paying for it, but he wasn't using it. So like, this isn't your typical wholesale type motivation where it's like, the seller's about to lose the house or they inherited a house. The motivation wasn't like super crazy, but there was enough motivation there for the seller to sell the house for a small discount. We ended up going under contract on the house for $240,000. We were able to sell it on the market for, I believe it was like $299, and we walked away with like, I think $36,000 profit in the end, 32 or 36, something like that. But, we were able to come very close to the seller's asking price of 250. We went under contract at 240, but this is something that we wouldn't have been able to do if we were only wholesaling, right? We'd probably have to be close to $75,000 below the seller's asking price in order to get this home under contract and find an investor that would take it off our hands, right? Probably would have had to been around 150,000, honestly, to make the kind of profit we did. $30,000 profit on this deal, and this is just a key example. That was an inbound lead. We called the seller immediately. We put them through our process, and again, ultimately, we were able to go under contract at 240. We sold it on the market for 300,000, and after all fees, were paid. We walked away with a little over $30,000 in profit. And again, Novations made this possible. An additional exit strategy made this possible. And I know a lot of wholesalers are skeptical to start doing novations for a number of reasons. The one I come across the most often is, with new wholesalers and even experienced wholesalers, they always ask, well, why wouldn't the seller just list the property themselves, right? And they ask that, but they don't ask that question when a seller's selling their house to them for 50% of what it's worth, right? That any seller has the option to list the house on the market. But the reason somebody would sell a house at a wholesale price is because they're dealing with something that allows them to value speed and convenience. And it's the same thing with novations, right? We're looking for sellers that value speed and convenience. And if they value speed and convenience, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to want to go through the process of finding a realtor to list the house for them, interviewing realtors and finding a good one, a reputable one, potentially putting some money into the house to fix it up before they list it, right? So there's a number of reasons why, a seller would opt to go with us, with the novation strategy as opposed to, selling on the market, finding their own agent. But I think, novations are of the, all of the other, exit strategies that most wholesalers use, in terms of creative finance. And the reason is because like the front end of the process is very similar, right? We don't change our sales process on the front end. It's the same, we're uncovering motivation, we're putting them through our discovery phase just to, fact find and ultimately determine if, this is a good opportunity for us to work. The only difference is the offer pitch is a little bit different. I wouldn't say it's a lot different, but I think what I like about Novations even more than the wholesale offer pitch is that it forces us to be transparent, right? We have to let the seller know everything that's going on up front in terms of, the fact that we're not going to be the end buyer. We're going to be marketing it to, other buyers, but, we're going to promise you the number that we agreed on. So again, like the whole sales process is the same other than the offer pitch. The pitch is different and, we have to be transparent about what's going on. But most of the time we're able to offer the seller a lot more money than we would be if we were, just wholesaling the deal, right? And what I found, doing so many innovation deals is that a lot of these sellers really don't care, what you're doing with the property, right? Most of them just care about, you know, getting true value, getting a true solution, finding a true solution, that allows them to get the money they're looking for, or at least, ballpark range, and that they're getting the actual speed and convenience that, we're talking about, right? So as long as they get their end result, they don't really care what happens with the house. So, the idea that the transparency piece and telling the seller up front what we're going to be doing with the house may kill some deals. Honestly, it's just kind of a mental hurdle that I had to get over, and most wholesalers have to get over when they kind of transition from wholesaling to doing some novations, right? But after doing so many, you know you kind of get that proof of concept, and you kind of understand that, hey, this works just as well or even better in some cases. So you just kind of have to get that proof of concept and get over that mental hurdle. But again, I really think it's probably one of the easiest quote unquote creative finance exit strategies to add to a wholesale operation, just because you're not, if you add creative finance or subject to or something like that, right? Like I would I would strongly encourage you to add that, again, because that will help you convert more of your inbound leads. But the sales pitch is completely different, because you have to convince somebody to allow them to, or allow you to take over their mortgage while leaving the mortgage in their name. So like, there has to be a lot of extra trust and rapport built. Any exit strategy is going to have, it's typical objections that you'll have to overcome. But once you learn how to overcome those objections, it shouldn't be an issue. With novations, the typical, the hardest objection that I come across, or the most common objections that I come across are, what happens if you're not able to find an end buyer, or, I just want to sell, directly to a third party, or, to the end buyer. I don't want to go through, a third party, or, a wholesaler to help me sell my house. And, those are both reasonable objections. But, with the wholesale transaction, I would say the most common objection with that is probably just the price, because you're offering so much less. So again, like, there are going to be mental hurdles that you have to overcome when you're adding novations to as an exit strategy. But like I said, I think this is one that you can pretty easily tack on to what you're already doing in your wholesale business. Because, it's similar in the fact that you're still offering the seller, a net cash price, and you're not, convincing them to let you, take over the deed of the home while the mortgage is still in the seller's name or anything like that. But I've talked about it a little bit already, but adding even more exit strategies would likely help as well. Like I said, we talked about subject to, creative finance. Again, those are different exit strategies that you have to learn how to pitch right and how to overcome those objections. But again, they will allow you to convert more of your leads. So, Novations will allow you to offer sellers more money, maybe convert sellers that aren't, dealing with such a crazy, situation that's leading to, some really strong motivation. But, adding creative finance, that will allow you to convert a lot of low equity leads, right? So if you think about sellers that are facing foreclosure, a lot of those leads don't have any equity. Or if you're, it kind of goes hand in hand with low equity. But if somebody just recently bought their house a few years ago, right, and they just it just hasn't appreciated enough for them to have enough equity in the home to even sell it on the market with an agent, adding creative finance, adding subject um to your tool belt will allow you to convert more of your leads. And the rule of thumb, I get the question all the time, how many leads is it gonna take for somebody to get a contract when they're running Facebook ads, right? And it's not necessarily a, you know, question that I can answer directly because it's gonna be different for everybody, right? I would say you should get, one layup for every 30 leads that you generate with Facebook ads, that you should just be able to, they're coming in, a lot of motivation, and the asking price is in the range where you can just easily get under contract and wholesale it. But out of those 30 leads, there are probably going to be other opportunities that are dealing with a good level of motivation, but maybe their asking price just isn't low enough for you to wholesale it, or they don't have enough equity for you to just do a cash transaction on it. So in these situations, having extra exit strategies, extra disposal, allows you to convert some of those leads where, hey, that they're not asking for a deep enough discount, or hey, they don't have enough equity, right? And for the people that have multiple exit strategies that are good on the phones, like, you should be able to get your conversion rate to about 1 in 20 leads as opposed to the 1 in 30 leads. And depending on how much you're paying per lead, that can really decrease your cost per contract by a lot. And ultimately, when you decrease your cost per contract, you're decreasing your cost per deal. You should be increasing, the your return on ad spend, or your ROAS, right? So, having those extra exit strategies really allows you to capitalize on your marketing spend, as opposed to having your hands tied and only defaulting to one exit strategy. The final takeaway from this video should be that inbound marketing provides a lot of opportunity, right? And it provides high quality leads, but you can't necessarily control the types of leads that are coming in, right? But ultimately, the investors who will win with inbound marketing are the ones that have multiple ways to structure deals. So if you're able to convert those low equity leads, those leads that, the house, where the house is in good shape and they're asking for a small discount, but not quite low enough to wholesale, right? When you're when you're able to convert those types of leads, that will definitely help you improve your lead to contract ratio, and ultimately your lead to deal ratio. So if you're interested in learning how to generate inbound Facebook leads and implement Novations as an exit strategy, inside of my Skool community, we cover both. If you look in the description below, I have a link to our inbound marketing and Novation Skool community. That includes the Facebook ads launch challenge. In this challenge, you'll learn how to launch your Facebook ads in the first 4 days. And then in days 5 through 28, you'll learn how to optimize and manage your ad campaigns over time. And we also teach how to implement the Novations exit strategy. So, if you want to pair inbound marketing with Novations and stack that onto what you're already doing with wholesale, I highly encourage you to, check it out. We also have a free Skool community that includes a crash course on running Facebook ads. It's called Inbound Leads Lab. Again, it's a free community where we have the crash course and give out freebies. But if you want to add Novations as an exit strategy, I would strongly encourage you to check out the Inbound Marketing and Novations Skool community. because again, it'll show you exactly the steps you need to take to tack that onto what you're already doing, as well as show you exactly the things that you need to do to get your Facebook ads up and running. The Facebook ads launch challenge is only $9 to start right now. And for anybody that completes the challenge from front to back, I will refund the $9 back to you. So it's a very low risk way to learn how to run Facebook ads and get some high quality leads coming in. And again, as you have those leads coming in, I would highly encourage you to consider implementing additional exit strategies, specifically novations, because again, this will just give you the best chance at maximizing your marketing dollars and increasing your ROAS.